Rain has a way of exposing things people spend years trying to hide. It was coming down hard that night, sharp, relentless, unforgiving. When Evelyn Carter finally saw the truth, she had been carefully stepping around for months, not because she didn't notice it, but because noticing it would mean she had to decide what it meant. Adrian Vale stood across from her, soaked through, his usually composed presence fractured in a way she had never seen before. No polished silence, no carefully measured tone. Just a man standing inside the consequences of something he could no longer control. "You should have told me," Evelyn said, her voice steady, but only because she was holding everything else in place. Adrian didn't answer immediately. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the rain, not the tension, not even the truth she had just learned. The silence. Because she had come to understand something about Adrian over time. His silence was never empty. It was always doing something, protecting something, avoiding something, hiding something. And tonight, it was failing him. Would it have changed anything? He finally asked. Evelyn let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. But there was no humor in it. "You don't get to decide that for me." That was the moment. Not when she learned the truth. Not when the past finally caught up with him. But right there, when she realized love had been built on something incomplete. And that, maybe, she had allowed it. Have you ever loved someone, and only later realized you were loving a version of them that wasn't entirely real? Not a lie. Not exactly, just edited. The kind of love that feels deep, safe, intentional, until one missing truth changes the meaning of everything that came before it. Because the hardest part isn't always what someone did. Sometimes it's what they didn't trust you enough to share. And the question that follows is never simple. Do you stay and try to rebuild something real, or do you walk away? Because truth came too late. This is a story about love, but not the kind that survives on feelings alone. It's about the kind that forces you to confront yourself, the kind that asks uncomfortable questions, the kind that doesn't just reveal who someone else is, but who you become when loving them. And by the time this story ends, one thing will be clear. Love is not just about connection. It's about truth, timing, and the courage to face both. "Say something, Adrian," Evelyn said, softer now, but somehow heavier. He looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was seeing the cost of everything he had chosen not to say before this moment. "I didn't tell you," he said slowly, "because I didn't want to lose the version of me you believed in." Evelyn's expression shifted, not dramatic, not explosive, just a quiet kind of hurt that settles deeper than anger. And instead she said, "You lost the chance to let me decide if I could love the real one." The rain continued to fall between them, and just like that, everything that once felt certain wasn't anymore. Months earlier, before the rain, before the truth, before love had been tested by something real, Evelyn Carter lived a life she had built carefully, intentionally, after learning what it meant to lose herself in someone else. She wasn't the kind of woman who chased intensity anymore. She valued clarity. She valued peace. She valued the quiet confidence that came from knowing who she was, and what she would no longer tolerate. Her apartment was modest, but warm. Books lined the shelves, not for decoration, but because she had read every single one of them. Her mornings were predictable in the best way. Strong coffee, soft music, and a few moments of stillness before the world demanded anything from her. There was a time in her life when love had meant compromise, when she believed understanding someone meant adjusting yourself around their limitations, when she thought patience alone could fix emotional distance. She had learned differently since then. Love, she realized, wasn't about how much you could endure. It was about how much truth it could hold. That lesson had not been easy. It had come from a relationship that slowly taught her what silence could do. Not loud, obvious silence, but the subtle kind, the kind where conversations felt complete, but something important was always just out of reach. By the time she walked away from that chapter of her life, she made herself a promise. Never again would she ignore what she felt, just to preserve what looked good. And for a long time, she kept that promise. Until Adrian Vale. The night they met didn't feel significant at first. No dramatic entrance, no instant spark, no cinematic moment that hinted at what was coming. Just a charity gallery in Manhattan, filled with people who knew how to look important. Evelyn had been invited by a colleague, more out of obligation than interest. She appreciated art, but not the kind surrounded by quiet competition and subtle judgment. She moved through the room slowly, observing more than participating. That's when she noticed him. Not because he stood out, But because he didn't try to, Adrian Vale stood near the back of the gallery, hands loosely in his pockets, his attention fixed on a painting that most people had already passed by. He looked still, not bored, not distracted, just contained, and something about that caught her attention. People who are comfortable usually expand into a space. People who are guarded hold themselves inside it. Evelyn studied him for a moment longer than she intended. Then, before she could overthink it, she walked over. "You're not looking at the painting," she said. Adrian glanced at her, slightly surprised, but not annoyed. "I am," he replied. She tilted her head. "No, you're standing in front of it. That's different." A small pause. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not charming, not rehearsed, just real. "That's a very specific observation," he said. "I notice things about strangers, about people who look like they're somewhere else entirely." He looked back at the painting, then at her again. "And where do I look like I am?" Evelyn considered the question. Not lightly, not playfully. "Somewhere you don't want anyone else to reach." That did it. That was the moment something shifted. Not attraction, not yet. Recognition. Adrian studied her more carefully now, like he was trying to understand how she saw through something he had spent years perfecting. "Most people don't say things like that," he said. "Most people don't mean what they say anyway," she replied. Another pause. But this one felt different. Less guarded, more curious. "What about you?" he asked. "Do you mean what you say?" Evelyn met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, and for reasons neither of them fully understood yet. That mattered. More than the setting, more than appearances, more than whatever first impressions usually rely on. Because in that moment, something rare happened. Two people who had learned, in different ways, to protect themselves, recognized something honest in each other. They didn't exchange numbers immediately. They didn't extend the conversation longer than necessary. But when Evelyn left that night, she carried something with her. Not excitement, not expectation, just a quiet awareness. And Adrian Vale, for the first time in a long time, found himself thinking about someone not because of what they offered him, but because of how clearly they saw him. And that was the beginning, not of love, but of something far more dangerous, the possibility of being known. Evelyn didn't expect to see him again. That was part of what made it honest. No pressure, no performance, no carefully constructed continuation. Just a moment shared between two strangers who had seen something real in each other, and then walked away before it could become complicated. But life has a quiet way of continuing conversations we think are over. 3 days later, Evelyn was in a small bookstore cafe, tucked between two busy streets. One of those places that felt untouched by urgency, the kind where time slowed just enough for people to hear themselves think. She sat near the window, a book open in front of her, though she hadn't turned a page in several minutes. Her mind kept drifting, not in a distracted way, but in that subtle, reflective way that meant something unresolved was still asking for attention. It wasn't him exactly, it was what the conversation had stirred. There are moments in life when someone doesn't change you, but they make you aware of something you had already been feeling, quietly, beneath the surface. Adrian had done that, not by saying anything extraordinary, but by not hiding, at least, not entirely. "Do you always read without reading?" The voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Evelyn looked up, and there he was, Adrian Vale, standing a few feet away, holding a coffee he clearly hadn't planned to drink alone. For a brief second, something almost like surprise passed through her, but it settled quickly into something steadier. "You again?" she said, closing her book. "I was starting to think I imagined that conversation," he replied. "You didn't," she said. "I would have remembered if I had imagined someone that guarded, trying to sound relaxed." He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head slightly. "So that's how you see me. That's how you presented yourself." There was no tension in her tone, just clarity. And strangely, Adrian didn't feel the need to correct her. "Can I sit?" he asked. Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her. "You're already halfway there." He sat, placing his coffee down, though his attention remained on her. "You come here often?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a line." "It does," he admitted. "But I actually mean it." "Yes," she said. "I like places that don't ask anything from me." He considered that. "And people? What about them? Do you like people who don't ask anything from you?" Evelyn leaned back slightly, studying him. Not suspicious, just thoughtful. "No," she said. "The right people should ask something. Just not everything." Adrian nodded slowly, like he was storing that answer somewhere deeper than the conversation required. That's fair. A brief silence followed, but not the uncomfortable kind. Just two people adjusting to the unexpected continuation of something unfinished. You didn't seem like the kind of man who wanders into places like this, Evelyn said. I don't, Adrian replied. Then why today? He hesitated, but only briefly. I needed somewhere quiet. That's not specific. No, he said. It's not. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. You do that. Do what? Answer, without actually answering. He didn't deny it. I'm used to conversations where details aren't always necessary, he said. And does that work for you? She asked. In business? Yes. And in your personal life? He held her gaze for a moment. Not as well. That was the first shift. Subtle, but real. Because this time, he didn't deflect. He acknowledged. Evelyn noticed. And more importantly, she respected it. Good, she said softly. That means you're at least aware of it. Adrian smiled faintly. Awareness doesn't always translate into change. No, she agreed. But it's where change starts. Another quiet pause. But something was different now. The distance between them felt smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. Like they were both stepping just slightly outside the boundaries they were used to. You're very direct, Adrian said. I've learned that it saves time. And does it scare people? Sometimes. Does that bother you? It used to, and now? Evelyn shrugged lightly. Now I think the right people don't feel threatened by honesty. They feel relieved by it. Adrian looked at her in a way that wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was recognition again. Stronger this time. Because she wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't adjusting herself. She was simply being, and that was rare in his world. Most people I meet, he said slowly, say what they think is appropriate. And you don't? I say what's necessary. That sounds exhausting, she replied. He almost laughed, but didn't. It can be. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but intentional. You don't always have to be necessary, you know. He didn't respond right away. Not because he disagreed, but because something about that statement landed deeper than expected. There are truths that don't feel like revelations. They feel like reminders of something you've been avoiding. Adrian picked up his coffee, more as a pause than anything else. And what about you? He asked. What have you been avoiding? Evelyn didn't look away. That question only works if you answer yours honestly first. He nodded once, accepting the terms. Fair. Another pause. But this one held weight. I avoid losing control, he said finally. Evelyn watched him carefully, not judging, not reacting too quickly. Control of what? How I'm seen. What people know, what they don't. And what happens if you lose that control? His jaw tightened slightly. Not defensive, just aware. Then people see things I'm not sure they'd understand. Evelyn's voice softened. Or things you're not sure you understand yourself. That hit closer, and they both knew it. Adrian exhaled slowly. Maybe. Evelyn nodded, not pushing further. Because she understood something important. People don't open up because they're forced to. They open up because they feel safe enough to. And right now, he was close, but not there yet. So, she said gently, shifting the moment just enough. What made you walk into a quiet cafe today instead of wherever it is you usually go? Adrian looked at her, then down at his cup, then back at her again. And this time, he didn't avoid it. I wanted to see if you'd be here. No hesitation, no deflection, just truth. Evelyn blinked once, not surprised but affected. That's more honest, she said. I'm trying, he replied. I can see that. And something settled between them. Not certainty, not expectation, but a mutual understanding. This wasn't going to be easy. Not because of drama, not because of external obstacles, but because both of them carried habits built from past experiences. Habits that protected them, but also limited them. Evelyn had learned not to ignore what she felt. Adrian had learned not to reveal too much. And somewhere between those two truths, something was beginning. Not perfect, not safe, but real enough to matter. They stayed longer than either of them planned, not because they were trying to extend the moment, but because the conversation kept unfolding naturally. No pressure, no performance. Just two people slowly exploring the edges of who they were, and what they allowed others to see. When they finally stood to leave, the city outside had softened into evening. Neither of them rushed to say goodbye. "I'm glad you came in," Evelyn said. "So am I," Adrian replied. A small pause. "Then, dinner?" he asked. Not confident, not uncertain, just open. Evelyn considered him, not the question. Him, then she nodded once. Dinner, and just like that, the beginning became something more. Not love, not yet, but something with direction, something with weight, something that would eventually ask more of them than either one was prepared to give. And the quiet truth neither of them understood yet was this: it's not the obvious moments that shape a relationship. It's the subtle ones, the small decisions, the things you choose to say, and the things you choose to keep, because those choices, over time, don't just define the relationship. They define who you become inside it, and neither Evelyn nor Adrian knew yet just how much they were about to learn. If this chapter made you reflect on your own experiences with love, honesty, and emotional distance, take a moment to pause and think, have you ever met someone who felt right, but something still felt hidden beneath the surface? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if you're drawn to stories that don't just entertain, but make you feel, reflect, and grow, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story is only just beginning, and the truth hasn't even fully surfaced yet. Dinner with Adrian Vale didn't feel like what Evelyn expected. There was no extravagant reservation under a name that turned heads, no dimly lit luxury designed to impress, no quiet display of wealth meant to signal status without saying it out loud. Instead, he chose a small, understated restaurant tucked away from the noise of the city. Warm lighting, soft conversation, and the kind of atmosphere that didn't try to be anything more than what it was. Evelyn noticed immediately. "You're full of surprises," she said, as they settled into their seats. Adrian glanced around, then back at her. "Disappointed?" "No," she replied. "Just adjusting." "To what?" "To the fact that you don't seem interested in being what people expect you to be." A faint smile touched his face. "You make that sound like a compliment." "It is." The waiter approached, and they ordered simply, no overthinking, no performance. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because both of them were aware of something unspoken. This wasn't casual, not in the way most first dinners are. There was already a level of awareness between them that made small talk feel unnecessary. "So," Adrian said eventually, "what made you approach me that night?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She rested her chin lightly against her hand, studying him, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that suggested she was choosing her answer carefully. "You didn't seem comfortable," she said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "In a room full of people?" "Yes, that's an interesting conclusion. It's an accurate one." Adrian leaned back slightly, considering her. "Most people would assume the opposite." "Most people read surfaces," she replied. "I pay attention to what doesn't match." "And what didn't match about me?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "You were in control of everything, except your presence." That landed, not heavily, but precisely. Adrian let out a slow breath. "You're very observant." "I've had to be." There was something in her tone. Not defensive, not guarded, but experienced. Adrian noticed. "You learned that the hard way?" he asked. Evelyn met his gaze. "Most important things are learned that way." He nodded, not pushing further, because he understood something too. Not every truth needs to be explained immediately. Some are better understood over time. Their food arrived, and for a few minutes, the conversation softened. Not disappeared, but relaxed into something easier. And that's when Adrian realized something unexpected. He wasn't performing. He wasn't choosing his words carefully to control how he was perceived. He wasn't calculating the outcome of the interaction. He was just there, present, and it felt unfamiliar, in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, just different. "You're quieter than I expected," Evelyn said after a moment. "I thought you said I avoid answering questions." "You do, but that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She took a sip of her drink before responding. "You seem like someone who's used to leading conversations." "I am, but you're not doing that right now." Adrian gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Maybe I don't feel the need to." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Why not?" He paused, not to avoid the question, but because he hadn't actually thought about the answer before. "Because I'm not trying to control how this goes," he said finally. Evelyn held his gaze for a second longer than usual. "That's new for you, isn't it?" Yes. And how does it feel? He considered that carefully. Honest. The word hung between them. Not heavy, but meaningful. Evelyn smiled, not broadly, not dramatically, but in a way that showed she understood the significance of that answer. Good, she said softly. You should try that more often. He almost laughed. You make it sound simple. It's not, she said, but it's necessary. Another pause. But this one felt different again. Less about uncertainty, more about awareness. There are moments in conversations where something shifts quietly, where both people realize they're not just talking anymore. They're revealing, and once that begins, it's hard to go back to anything surface level. So, what about you? Adrian asked. What do you avoid? Evelyn exhaled slowly, not because she didn't want to answer, but because she respected the question enough to answer it properly. I used to avoid being alone, she said. Adrian didn't interrupt. I thought love meant staying, she continued, even when something didn't feel right, even when conversations felt incomplete, even when I had to adjust myself to keep things stable. She paused briefly. But I realized something eventually. What? He asked quietly. That staying isn't always loyalty. Sometimes it's fear. Adrian's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Fear of what? Of starting over, she said. Of admitting you chose something that wasn't right for you. Of facing yourself without the distraction of someone else. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. And now? Now I don't avoid being alone, she said. I avoid losing myself. That sentence settled deeply, because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic for effect. It was simply true. Adrian looked at her differently after that, not with curiosity, but with respect. Most people don't get to that point, he said. They do, Evelyn replied. They just don't always accept it. And you did? She shrugged lightly. I didn't have much of a choice. The alternative was continuing something that felt incomplete. Incomplete how? Evelyn's eyes softened slightly. Not sad, just reflective. Like I was always understanding more than I was being understood. That stayed with him, because for the first time, Adrian felt something uncomfortable. Not because of her past, but because he recognized the possibility of becoming that person, the one who receives more than they give emotionally, the one who is seen, but doesn't fully reveal. And for a moment, something quiet shifted inside him. Not a decision, not a realization fully formed, just awareness. And awareness, as Evelyn had said before, is where change begins. You're thinking, she said gently. I am. About what? He looked at her, and for once, didn't filter the answer. About how easy it is to become someone who feels safe, but isn't fully honest. Evelyn didn't react immediately, because she understood the weight of that statement. That's a dangerous place to be, she said. Why? Because it looks like love, she replied, but it doesn't feel like truth. Silence followed, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, of possibility, of something beginning to take shape between them, not through attraction alone, but through honesty. And maybe that's why this moment mattered more than either of them realized. Because real connection doesn't start when two people like each other. It starts when they begin to understand each other, and whether they were ready for it or not. That process had already begun. By the time they stepped out of the restaurant, the night had settled into something quieter. The city was still alive, cars moving, voices blending into the background, light stretching across glass and pavement. But between them, something had slowed. Not awkward, not uncertain, just intentional. They walked side by side without rushing. No immediate need to fill the silence. And that, more than anything, was new for Adrian. I usually know how these things go, he said after a while. Evelyn glanced at him. These things? First dinners, conversations, the pace of it. And tonight? He gave a small, almost amused exhale. I don't. Evelyn smiled faintly. Good. Good? Yes, she said. It means you're not following a pattern. And that's better? It's more honest. They stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. A soft breeze passed between them, carrying the quiet rhythm of the city along with it. Adrian looked ahead, then at her. You're not trying to impress me, he said. Evelyn shrugged lightly. I don't see the point. Most people do. Most people want to be chosen, she replied. I'd rather be understood. That stayed with him longer than he expected. Isn't that the same thing? He asked. No, she said gently. Being chosen can happen for a lot of reasons. Being understood requires truth. The light changed, and they crossed. Adrian didn't respond right away, because he knew she was right. And because part of him wasn't sure how often he had actually allowed that level of truth in his own life. When they reached her building, neither of them moved to end the moment too quickly. That hesitation wasn't confusion. It was awareness. "I had a good time," Evelyn said. "So did I," Adrian replied. Another pause. Then, "Do you always do this?" he asked. "Do what?" "Make people think more than they plan to." Evelyn smiled slightly. "Only when they're ready to." "And how do you know if they're ready?" "I don't," she said, "but I can tell when they're willing." Adrian held her gaze for a moment. "I think I am," he said quietly. There was no performance in it, no attempt to sound impressive, just truth, simple and unpolished. Evelyn noticed, and, more importantly, she believed him. "Good," she said. Then, after a small pause, "Just don't confuse willingness with readiness." Adrian frowned slightly. "There's a difference?" "A big one." "Explain." Evelyn took a breath, not because it was difficult, but because she wanted to say it clearly. "Willingness is wanting to be open," she said. "Readiness is actually being able to handle what comes with that." He absorbed that slowly. "And what comes with it?" he asked. "Being seen fully," she replied. "Not just the parts you're comfortable with." Adrian's expression shifted, subtle, but real. "And if someone isn't ready for that, then they end up holding back without realizing it," she said. "And the other person feels it, even if they can't explain it." That landed deeper than he expected, because it named something he had felt before, but never fully understood. That quiet distance in relationships that doesn't come from conflict, but from something unspoken. "I don't want to do that," he said. Evelyn studied him carefully, not judging, just observing. "Then don't," she said simply. "It's not that easy." "No," she agreed. "It's not." "Then how?" Evelyn's voice softened slightly. "By being honest before it becomes necessary." Adrian frowned. "What do you mean?" "Most people wait until something goes wrong to tell the truth," she explained. "But by then, the truth feels like damage control instead of honesty." He nodded, slowly. "And that changes how it's received," he said. "Exactly." Another quiet moment passed, but this one carried weight, because something important had just been said. Not dramatically, not forcefully, but in a way that would matter later, more than either of them realized right now. Adrian glanced at her door, then back at her. "I'd like to see you again," he said. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I'd like that too." And that could have been enough. Simple, clear, uncomplicated. But something in Adrian, something unfamiliar, made him add one more thing. "I don't want this to feel incomplete," he said. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Not suspicious, just curious. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, choosing his words more carefully now, "I don't want to be someone who shows up halfway and expects that to be enough." That caught her attention. Fully, because it wasn't just what he said. It was what it implied. Awareness, responsibility, possibility. "That's a good intention," she said. "But," he asked, "but intentions don't always translate into behavior." He nodded once. "I know." "Do you?" she asked gently. He met her gaze. "I'm starting to." Evelyn held his eyes for a moment longer. Then she smiled. Not wide, not overly warm, but real. "That's a good place to start." Another pause. Then she stepped slightly closer. Not into intimacy, but into presence. "Just remember something," she added. "What?" "People don't expect perfection," she said. "They expect consistency." Adrian absorbed that, because it was simple, and because it was true. "I can do that," he said. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, because she had learned something through experience. People don't show you who they are through what they promise. They show you through what they repeat. "We'll see," she said softly, not dismissive, not doubtful, just honest. And somehow, that meant more than reassurance would have. Adrian smiled faintly. "I deserve that," he said. "You do," she replied. Then she stepped back toward her door. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Evelyn." She walked inside. The door closed gently behind her, and Adrian stood there for a moment longer than necessary, not because he was waiting, but because something had shifted, not in the relationship, but in himself. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about outcomes. He wasn't analyzing what came next. He wasn't calculating how things might unfold. He was just present in what had already happened. And that presence came with something unexpected, a quiet awareness that this wasn't just another connection. It wasn't built on surface-level attraction or convenience. It wasn't driven by ego or expectation. It was something slower, something more deliberate, something that would require more from him than he was used to giving. And deep down, whether he fully understood it yet or not, he knew this was the kind of connection that doesn't just fit into your life. It changes how you live it. Upstairs, Evelyn leaned against her door for a moment after closing it, not overwhelmed, not swept away, just thoughtful, because she had felt it too. That difference, that subtle shift between something casual and something meaningful. But she also knew something else, something experience had taught her clearly. Potential is not the same as reality. And no matter how promising something feels in the beginning, what matters is what it becomes over time. She pushed herself gently away from the door, walking further into her apartment, calm, grounded, aware, because while something had begun, she wasn't going to lose herself in it. Not again, not this time. And maybe that was the most important difference of all. Because love, when it's real, doesn't ask you to forget yourself. It asks you to bring your full self into it. And whether Adrian was ready for that was a question time would answer. Not words, not intentions, not moments like this, but choices, consistent ones, and those, she knew, were still ahead. The beginning of something real rarely feels dramatic. It feels easy, not effortless, but natural, like two lives learning how to move around each other without force. That's how it started for Evelyn and Adrian, not with intensity, but with consistency. He called when he said he would. He showed up when he said he would. And more importantly, when he was with her, he was with her, not distracted, not halfway present, not pulled between conversations and obligations, present. And for Evelyn, that mattered more than anything else, because she had learned the hard way that attention is one of the purest forms of care. They settled into a rhythm neither of them rushed to define. Dinners that turned into long walks, conversations that moved from light to meaningful without effort, quiet moments that didn't feel like gaps, but like space. And slowly, something began to build. Trust, not declared, not assumed, but formed through repetition. One evening, they sat in his apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city in soft light. Evelyn had her legs tucked under her, a book resting on her lap. Adrian stood near the kitchen, finishing a call. His tone was calm, controlled, precise, the way he always sounded when he was handling business. Evelyn didn't pay attention to the words. She paid attention to the shift, the version of him that existed in that space. Because people don't become different in different environments. They reveal different parts of themselves. When he ended the call and walked back toward her, something softened again. His shoulders relaxed. His expression changed, subtly, but enough. "You disappeared for a second," she said. "Work," he replied. "It couldn't wait." She nodded, not questioning it. But she noticed something. Not what he said, what he didn't. There was a slight delay in his explanation, not hesitation. Not exactly, just a space where more could have been said. She let it go. Not because she didn't care, but because she was still learning the difference between intuition and assumption. "How's the book?" he asked, sitting across from her. "It's good," she said, "but I already know how it ends." "You always do that? Read the ending first?" "Yes." She smiled faintly. "Not always. Just when I don't trust the middle." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "You don't trust the middle?" "I trust how things begin," she said, "and I trust how they end. But the middle—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That's where things get complicated." "How so?" "That's where people start revealing who they really are," she said, not intentionally, just over time. Adrian leaned back slightly, considering that. "And you think that's where things fall apart?" "I think that's where things become real," she corrected. "And not everyone is ready for that." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the conversation held something deeper than the words themselves. Because both of them understood, whether consciously or not, that they were stepping into that space now. The middle, where things stop being ideal and start becoming honest. "You think we're there?" Adrian asked. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She closed her book gently, setting it aside. "I think we're getting there," she said. "And how do you feel about that?" She studied him, Not cautiously, not guarded, but thoughtfully. Curious, she said, not nervous? I've learned that nervous usually means something matters, she replied. So, no, I don't avoid it. Adrian smiled slightly. That's an interesting way to look at it. It's a practical one. And what about you? She asked. How do you feel about it? He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he wasn't used to saying it out loud. Aware, he said finally. Of what? Of the fact that things are changing. And that bothers you? No, he said. It just requires something different from me. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Like what? Adrian looked at her, then away briefly, then back again. Less control, he said. That was honest. And she recognized it. Control of what? She asked gently. How I present myself, he said. What the first say. What I don't. And you feel like you can't do that here? He shook his head slowly. I feel like I shouldn't. That mattered more than anything else he could have said, because it meant he wasn't just reacting to her, he was reflecting on himself. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her voice calm. That's a good sign. Why? Because it means you're aware of the difference between connection and performance. Adrian nodded slowly. But awareness doesn't mean I won't fall back into it, he admitted. Evelyn gave a small, understanding smile. No one changes overnight, she said. The important thing is that you notice when you do. Another quiet moment passed, but it didn't feel uncertain. It felt steady, like something was building, but carefully, without rush, without pressure. Later that night, as they sat side by side, the conversation softened into something lighter. Not because the depth disappeared, but because it didn't need to carry everything at once. That's the thing about real connection. It doesn't stay intense all the time. It moves. It breathes. It allows space. And that space is where comfort begins. But comfort, Evelyn knew, can sometimes become dangerous. Not because it's bad, but because it can make you overlook things that don't immediately feel like problems. Small things, subtle things, the kind that don't stand out on their own, but begin to form patterns over time. And patterns always mean something. She didn't see it clearly yet. Not fully, but something in her was paying attention. Not suspicious, not anxious, just aware, because she had learned something important. The beginning of a relationship shows you what someone wants you to see. The middle shows you what they don't realize they're revealing. And whether she was ready or not, they were slowly entering that middle. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where Evelyn suddenly realized something was wrong. That's not how it works when something is slowly becoming incomplete. It happens in pieces. Small ones. Easy to overlook. Easy to explain. Easy to excuse. Especially when everything else feels right. And for a while, everything did feel right. Adrian was consistent, attentive, present in the ways that mattered. He remembered the details she mentioned in passing. He checked in without being prompted. He made space for her in a life that was clearly full. On the surface, there was nothing missing. But beneath that surface, something was, and Evelyn felt it before she understood it. It started with conversations, not the obvious ones, the deeper ones, the ones that moved just close enough to something real, before quietly shifting away. One evening, they were sitting in his living room again, the city glowing faintly behind them. Evelyn had her feet tucked beneath her, a glass of water in her hand. Adrian sat across from her, unusually quiet. You've been distracted tonight, she said. Have the first? He replied, yes. He glanced down briefly, then back at her. Just a long day. That's not what I meant. He held her gaze. Then what did you mean? Evelyn tilted her head slightly, searching for the right way to say it. Not to accuse, not to push, but to understand. You're here, she said slowly. But not fully. Adrian didn't respond immediately, not because he disagreed, but because he knew. She was right. I didn't realize it was that noticeable, he said. It is, she replied gently. A small pause. Then, do you want to talk about it? She asked. There it was. Simple, open, no pressure, just an invitation. Adrian leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. There's nothing specific, he said. Just things I'm dealing with. Evelyn nodded. Okay. And she left it there. Not because she didn't care, but because she respected something important. People don't open up on command, but they do remember when they're given space to. Still, something lingered, not in his words, but in what they lacked. Clarity. specificity, truth, in its full form. And that's where the subtle shift began, not in what he said, but in how often he stopped just short of saying more. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, a pattern began to form. Adrian would open up, just enough, then pause, then redirect, sometimes with humor, sometimes with logic, sometimes with silence, and each time it was almost invisible, but not to Evelyn, because she wasn't listening only to his words. She was listening to the gaps between them. And gaps, she had learned, are rarely empty. They're usually filled with something unspoken. One afternoon, they were walking through the park, the air cool, the pace unhurried. Evelyn slipped her hands into her coat pockets, glancing at him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You always do," Adrian replied lightly. "This one's different." That caught his attention. He looked at her more closely. "All right." She slowed her steps slightly. "When something matters to you, how do you handle it?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, "do you talk about it? Do you process it with someone? Or do you keep it to yourself?" Adrian took a moment before answering. "I handle things," he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's not an answer." "It is for me. That's not what I asked." He sighed softly, not annoyed, just aware that she wasn't going to let him stay on the surface. "I usually deal with things on my own," he said finally. "Why?" "Because it's more efficient." Evelyn stopped walking. He took another step before realizing she had paused, then turned back toward her. "That's not the real reason," she said. Adrian's expression tightened slightly, not defensive, but cautious. "And what do you think the real reason is?" Evelyn met his gaze calmly. "I think you don't trust what happens when you let people see what you're actually dealing with." Silence. Not tense, not loud, but full, because she hadn't guessed. She had seen. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, then away, then back again. "That's not entirely wrong," he admitted. Evelyn nodded once. "Do you want it to be true?" He hesitated. That question went deeper than he expected. "No," he said quietly. "Then why keep doing it?" He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Because it's easier than explaining things that are complicated." Evelyn's voice softened, but didn't lose its clarity. "Or because explaining them would make them real in a way you can't control." That hit, not sharply, but accurately. Adrian didn't argue, because he couldn't. "I don't like losing control of situations I don't fully understand," he said. "And people?" she asked. "What about them? Do you think you can fully understand them before letting them see you?" He didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. No. Evelyn stepped a little closer, not to pressure him, but to bring the moment into focus. "You don't have to have everything figured out to be honest," she said. "I know." "Then why does it feel like you're still holding something back?" There it was. Not an accusation, not a confrontation, just a question. But sometimes, the right question feels heavier than any statement. Adrian looked at her. Really looked at her. And for a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not fully open, but closer than before. "I'm not used to." He started, then stopped. "Used to what?" she asked gently. "Letting things exist without managing how they're perceived." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," he admitted. "Then why keep doing it?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Because I don't know what happens if I stop." Evelyn held his gaze, and in that moment, she understood something clearly. This wasn't about dishonesty. Not in the obvious sense. Adrian wasn't lying. He just wasn't fully allowing himself to be seen, and that kind of distance is harder to confront, because it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like something almost right, almost enough, almost complete, but almost is where things quietly fall apart. "I don't need you to have everything figured out," she said softly. "I know. I just need you to not shut me out of the parts you don't." Adrian nodded, but there was hesitation in it, not refusal, just uncertainty. "I'm trying," he said. Evelyn believed him, but belief didn't erase what she was starting to feel, and that feeling was new. Not fear, not doubt, but awareness. The kind that comes before clarity. "Trying matters," she said, "but so does what it leads to." He didn't respond, because he knew that was true. They continued walking, but something had shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to break anything, but enough to change the tone. Because once you notice a pattern, you can't unsee it. And Evelyn had noticed not everything, not the full truth, but enough to understand one important thing. There was a part of Adrian she hadn't reached yet, and the question wasn't whether it existed, it was whether he would ever let her see it, or if, without realizing it, he would keep her just close enough to feel connected, but not close enough to truly know him, and if that continued, she knew exactly where it would lead, not to conflict, not to chaos, but to something quieter, something harder to recognize until it's too late, a relationship that looks complete, but never fully becomes it, and Evelyn had promised herself once before she would never stay in something that felt like that again. The only problem was, she wasn't ready to walk away yet, because part of her still believed he might meet her there, if he chose to. The first crack didn't arrive loudly. It didn't announce itself as a problem. It came quietly, like most truths do, slipping into a moment that wasn't prepared to hold it. It was a Thursday evening, nothing unusual. Evelyn had come over after work, her bag resting near the door, her heels kicked off somewhere along the hallway. Adrian's apartment carried its usual calm, clean, controlled, untouched by chaos. He was in his study, the door slightly open, on a call. Evelyn wasn't trying to listen. She moved through the space casually, pouring herself a glass of water, letting the quiet of the apartment settle around her. But sometimes it's not about trying to hear something, it's about what reaches you anyway. We agreed this wouldn't resurface. Adrian's voice came, low, controlled, but edged with something she hadn't heard before. Tension. Evelyn paused. Not deliberately, just instinctively. I don't care what they're asking for now, he continued. That situation was handled. A brief silence. Then, no one can know what happened in Baltimore. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed, directly, clearly, and something inside Evelyn shifted, not dramatically, not with immediate alarm, but with awareness, because tone matters more than words sometimes. And Adrian's tone wasn't calm, it wasn't measured, it was tight, controlled in a way that suggested something was trying to stay contained. Evelyn stood still for a moment longer. Then she moved again, slowly, deliberately, back into the living room, giving him space to finish. She wasn't trying to catch more, she had already heard enough. A few minutes later, Adrian stepped out of the study, and, just like that, the version of him she knew returned. Relaxed posture, composed expression, voice steady. "How was your day?" he asked, as if nothing had shifted. Evelyn looked at him, not suspicious, not confrontational, just attentive. "It was fine," she said. He nodded, walking toward the kitchen. "You want something to eat? I was thinking we could order." What happened in Baltimore? The question stopped him, mid-step. He didn't turn around immediately, and in that small delay, Evelyn felt it. Confirmation, because when a question is simple, and the answer isn't immediate, there's usually a reason. Adrian slowly turned to face her. His expression hadn't changed much, but something in his eyes had. A level of awareness, measured, careful. "What do you mean?" he asked. Evelyn didn't move. "I heard part of your call," she said. He held her gaze. "How much?" he asked. "Enough." Silence, not heavy, but deliberate, because now, this moment wasn't accidental anymore. It was intentional, and how it unfolded would matter. "It's an old situation," Adrian said finally. "Old doesn't mean irrelevant," Evelyn replied. "It's already been dealt with." "That's not what I asked." His jaw tightened slightly, not visibly enough for most people to notice, but Evelyn did, because she was paying attention. "What do you want to know?" he asked. "The truth," she said simply. Another pause, longer this time, and in that space, Evelyn realized something important. He wasn't deciding what to say. He was deciding how much to say, and that difference meant everything. "It was a business issue," he said. "What kind of business issue?" "Complicated." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give right now." There it was, not a lie, but not honesty either. Something in between, and somehow, that felt heavier. Evelyn took a small breath, not to calm herself, but to stay grounded. "Why?" she asked. Adrian didn't respond immediately. "Because it involves things that don't just affect me," he said. "That's vague." "It's accurate." She studied him carefully. "You're choosing your words," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because not everything needs to be explained immediately." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I agree," she said. That surprised him. He hadn't expected agreement. But, she continued, her voice steady, that only works when both people trust that the truth is still coming. Adrian looked at her, really looked this time. And for the first time since the conversation started, he didn't look fully in control. Do you trust that? He asked. Evelyn didn't answer right away, because this wasn't just about the situation anymore. It was about something deeper, something quieter. I want to, she said. That wasn't reassurance. It was honesty. And honesty sometimes carries more weight than certainty. Adrian exhaled slowly. I'm not hiding anything from you, he said. Evelyn held his gaze. You're not showing me everything either. Silence. That sentence landed differently, because it wasn't accusing, it was observing. And observations are harder to argue with. I told you before, he said, quieter now. I don't always know how to be open without controlling how it's received, she finished gently. He nodded. Then, this is one of those moments, she said. Another pause. And now, something had shifted. The conversation wasn't about Baltimore anymore. It was about trust, about presence, about what it means to let someone in. Fully. I'm not ready to go into it yet, Adrian said. There it was. Clear, direct, finally honest. Evelyn nodded once. Okay. No argument, no push, no escalation. And somehow, that made it heavier. Because she wasn't forcing him. She was allowing him to choose. And what he chose would matter. Does that bother you? He asked. Evelyn took a moment before answering. Yes, she said. Not angry, not emotional, just true. Why? He asked. Because I don't know what I'm being asked to trust, she replied. That settled between them. Deep, unavoidable. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. I'm trying to handle it, he said. I believe you, Evelyn replied. But I don't know if handling it includes me, or keeps me outside of it. That was the difference. And they both knew it. Adrian didn't respond, because for the first time, he didn't have a controlled answer. And Evelyn didn't push further, because she understood something too. You can't force honesty, but you can recognize when it's incomplete. And once you see that, it changes everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly, quietly, in the way you listen, in the way you observe, in the way you begin to notice what's there and what isn't. The evening continued, but not the same way it started. Conversation happened, dinner arrived, moments passed, but something had shifted, not broken, not damaged, just altered, because now there was a question in the space between them, unspoken, but present. What else hasn't been said? And the thing about that question is, once it exists, it doesn't disappear on its own. It waits for clarity or confirmation, and neither had arrived yet. But something told Evelyn it would. After that night, nothing looked different, and that was exactly what made it harder to understand. Adrian still called, still showed up, still listened when she spoke. If someone had looked at them from the outside, they would have seen the same steady rhythm. Two people growing closer, learning each other, building something that seemed thoughtful and real. But Evelyn had learned something a long time ago. A relationship doesn't shift when things change. It shifts when things start to feel uncertain. And uncertainty rarely announces itself. It lingers, quietly, subtly, in the space between what is said and what is held back. A few days later, they met for lunch. A simple place near her office. Nothing elaborate. Evelyn arrived first, seated by the window, watching people pass by with the kind of detached awareness that comes when your thoughts are somewhere else entirely. She wasn't overthinking. She was processing. There's a difference. Overthinking looks for problems. Processing listens for patterns. And something had started to form. Not fully clear yet, but present enough to feel. Adrian arrived a few minutes later, his usual composed energy settling into the space as he sat across from her. Sorry I'm late, he said. You're not, she replied. He studied her for a moment. You seem quieter today. Evelyn gave a small smile. I am. Why? She didn't answer immediately. Not because she was avoiding it, but because she was deciding how much to say. I've been thinking, she said. Adrian leaned back slightly. That's usually where your most difficult questions come from. She almost smiled. Probably, she said. A waiter approached, and they ordered quickly, neither of them particularly focused on the menu, because the conversation already had direction. When the waiter left, Evelyn looked at him. Not intensely, not confrontationally, just clearly. "Can I ask you something without you trying to manage the answer?" she said. Adrian exhaled lightly. "I'll try." "That's not what I asked." He nodded once. "Okay. Ask." Evelyn folded her hands loosely on the table. "When something is unresolved in your life, something that hasn't been fully dealt with, do you let people close to you know it exists?" Adrian's expression didn't change much, but something behind it did. "That's a very specific question," he said. "It's an intentional one." He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away briefly before answering. "Not always." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Why?" He gave a faint, controlled breath. "Because not everything needs to involve other people." "That's not what I asked." He looked back at her. "You're going to keep doing that, aren't you?" "Yes," she said calmly. "Because I'm not asking surface-level questions." A small pause. Then Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "Sometimes," he said, "I don't bring things up because I don't want them to affect something that's working." Evelyn's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "So, you separate parts of your life?" "I manage them," he corrected. "And do you think that works in a relationship?" Another pause. This one longer. "Sometimes," he said. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Does it feel like it's working now?" That question didn't land lightly, because it wasn't theoretical anymore. It was present, real. Adrian didn't answer right away, and in that silence, Evelyn felt it again. That gap, that almost, "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" "On whether what I'm not saying actually changes anything." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. Then she leaned back slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Let me ask you that differently." He waited. "Do you think what you're not saying matters?" There it was, clear, simple, and impossible to soften. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and this time, he didn't look composed. He looked thoughtful, honest. "Yes," he said. Evelyn held his gaze. "Then, it changes something." Silence. Not tense, not explosive, but undeniable. Because truth, when spoken clearly, doesn't need emphasis. It stands on its own. Adrian exhaled slowly, running a hand across his jaw. "I don't want to complicate this," he said. Evelyn nodded once. "I understand that. But you think I already am," he added. She didn't hesitate. "I think you might be," she said. That was it. No accusation, no escalation, just clarity. And clarity doesn't leave much room to hide. The food arrived, but neither of them reached for it immediately, because something more important had already taken center stage. "Why didn't you ask me directly about Baltimore again?" Adrian said after a moment. Evelyn looked at him. "I didn't need to." "That doesn't make sense." "It does," she said gently, "because I already know what matters isn't just what happened. As whether you're willing to let me be part of understanding it." He frowned slightly. "And you think I'm not?" Evelyn didn't answer right away, because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about recognizing a pattern. "I think you don't realize when you're holding something back," she said. "That's not intentional." "I know," she replied. "And that makes it better?" She shook her head softly. "No, it makes it harder." Adrian leaned back, absorbing that. "Why harder?" he asked. "Because if it were intentional, we could address it directly," she said. "But when it's unconscious, it keeps happening without you noticing." That hit deeper than anything else she had said, because it wasn't about one moment. It was about a pattern. And patterns require awareness to change. "I told you I'm trying," he said. "I believe you," she replied. "But trying doesn't mean it's not affecting things." Another pause. And now, something had shifted again. Not in a way that broke them, but in a way that made things clearer. And clarity isn't always comfortable. "Do you want to know everything?" Adrian asked. Evelyn considered that carefully. "No," she said. That surprised him. "No?" "No," she repeated. "I don't need every detail." "Then what do you need?" She looked at him, fully, honestly. "I need to know that what matters isn't being kept at a distance from me." That was the heart of it. Not information, not control, not even answers. Just inclusion, emotional presence, trust. Adrian nodded slowly. "I understand that." "Do you?" she asked softly. Another pause, this time quieter. I'm starting to, he said. Evelyn gave a small, thoughtful nod, and that was enough, for now. Not resolution, not certainty, just acknowledgement. They ate after that. The conversation shifted. Lighter topics returned, but something had changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, because now, both of them were aware of something that hadn't been fully seen before. A difference in how they approached truth, a difference in how they handled what was difficult, and, most importantly, a difference in what they believed a relationship should hold. As they left the restaurant, walking side by side again, the space between them didn't feel broken, but it didn't feel untouched either. It felt aware, and awareness, once it enters a relationship, doesn't disappear. It grows, it asks questions, it waits for answers, and whether those answers come or don't determines everything that follows. Evelyn glanced at him briefly as they reached the corner, not searching, not questioning, just observing, because she knew something now, something quiet but important. This wasn't about one secret. It was about whether he would ever let her fully stand beside him, in the parts of his life that weren't easy to explain, and that wasn't a question she could answer for him. Only he could, through what he chose next. Not what he said, but what he allowed. And something told her that moment was coming, sooner than he expected. This chapter wasn't loud, but it said everything. Sometimes the biggest cracks in a relationship don't come from betrayal. They come from what's left unsaid. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like someone was honest with you, but not fully open? Like you were close, but not completely included? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your experience. And if this story is hitting deeper than just entertainment, if it's making you reflect, question, or even see your own story differently, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, because what's coming next will change everything. The truth isn't just approaching, it's about to surface. Uncertainty doesn't always feel like chaos. Sometimes it feels like calm with questions underneath. That's where Evelyn found herself. Nothing had broken, nothing had ended, but something had shifted. And now, everything felt slightly off. Not enough to walk away, but enough to notice. And once you notice something like that, it doesn't fade. It waits, it watches, it asks quietly, is this still right, or just familiar? The next few days passed without conflict. Adrian was still present, still attentive, still consistent, and yet something inside Evelyn wasn't settling the way it used to, not because he had changed drastically, but because she had started seeing more clearly. Awareness has a way of doing that. It doesn't create problems, it reveals what was already there. One evening, they sat together in her apartment. The energy was soft, comfortable. Music played quietly in the background, while Evelyn moved around the kitchen, preparing something simple. Adrian leaned against the counter, watching her. Not intensely, not analytically, just watching. You're thinking again, he said. Evelyn glanced at him, a small smile forming. I usually am. About something specific? She turned off the stove, then faced him. Yes. Adrian straightened slightly. Do I get to know what it is? Evelyn hesitated, not because she didn't want to say it, but because she understood something important. There are moments where honesty can either build connection or expose distance, and this felt like one of them. I've been trying to understand something, she said. What? She leaned back against the counter, arms loosely crossed. Not defensive, just grounded. The difference between someone being consistent and someone being fully present. Adrian frowned slightly. Aren't those the same thing? Evelyn shook her head gently. No. He waited. Consistency is showing up, she explained. Being reliable. Doing what you say you'll do. And presence? Presence is letting someone feel like they're actually with you, she said. Not just next to you. That landed, because it wasn't abstract. It was specific, personal, and you think I'm not doing that? He asked. Evelyn didn't rush to answer, because this wasn't about proving something. It was about understanding it. I think you are, most of the time, she said, and the rest of the time. She met his eyes. You're somewhere else. Adrian exhaled slowly. Work, he said. Evelyn nodded. Sometimes, she agreed. But not always. Silence. Not tense, but honest. Then where do you think I am? He asked. Evelyn's voice softened. Somewhere you're not letting me see. That was it. Simple, clear, and impossible to ignore. Adrian looked at her. Really looked, this time. And something in his expression shifted. Not defensive, not closed, but aware. I don't do that intentionally, he said. I know, Evelyn replied. And that makes it better? She shook her head slightly. No, she said. It just means you don't realize when it happens. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking, that's not easy to change, he said. I'm not asking you to change it overnight, she replied. Then what are you asking? Evelyn paused. Not for effect. For clarity. I'm asking you to notice it, she said. And then? And then decide if you're willing to let me in when it matters. Adrian leaned back slightly, absorbing that. And if I'm not? He asked. Evelyn held his gaze. Then eventually, I'll feel it. That doesn't answer the question. It does, she said gently. Because some answers don't need to be spelled out to be understood. And he understood. Maybe not completely, but enough. The room fell quiet again. But this silence felt different. Not distant, not unresolved. Just reflective. There are moments in relationships where things become clearer, not because something new is revealed, but because something already present is finally acknowledged. And that's where they were now, not in conflict, but in awareness. Later that night, they moved to the couch, the conversation shifting into something lighter, not because the depth disappeared, but because neither of them wanted to carry it all at once. That's another truth about real connection. It doesn't stay heavy. It moves. It gives space. It allows people to breathe between the hard parts. Evelyn leaned back, her head resting against the cushion, her legs stretched out beside him. Adrian sat close, but not too close. Comfortable, but still. Measured. She noticed it. Not consciously at first, but in the way her body responded. There was a slight distance. Not physical, but emotional. Like something wasn't fully meeting her where she was. And that's when it became clearer. Not fully, but enough. This wasn't about one conversation, or one moment. It was about a pattern, a quiet one, but consistent. Adrian was present, but not always available. And those are not the same thing. Presence is being there. Availability is being open. And somewhere between those two, something was missing. Evelyn turned her head slightly, looking at him. He was relaxed, calm, at ease, and that made it harder. Because there was no obvious problem, no clear reason to question anything, just a feeling. And feelings, she had learned, don't need proof to be valid. You're doing it again, she said softly. Adrian looked at her. Doing what? Being here. But not fully. He frowned slightly. I'm right here. I know, she said. That's not what I meant. He studied her for a moment. Then, where do you think I am? He asked. Evelyn took a breath, choosing honesty again. Somewhere you don't want to bring me. That was the difference. And they both felt it. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Because this time, he couldn't dismiss it. He couldn't redirect it. He couldn't simplify it. Because it was true. Not entirely, but enough to matter. I don't know how to explain things I don't fully understand myself, he said quietly. Evelyn's expression softened. That's okay, she said. It is. Yes, she replied. As long as you don't use that as a reason to keep me out. Another pause. And now, something had shifted again. Not in tension, but in honesty. I'm not used to that, Adrian admitted. Letting someone see the parts I haven't figured out yet. Evelyn nodded slowly. I know. And you're okay with that? She smiled faintly. I'm not afraid of what's unclear, she said. I'm only concerned about what's kept hidden. That was the line, and it settled deeply between them. Because it wasn't demanding, it wasn't forcing, it was simply defining what she needed, what she valued, what she would not ignore. Adrian leaned back, exhaling slowly. I don't want to lose this, he said. Evelyn looked at him. You won't, she said. Not reassuring, just honest, unless you keep holding parts of yourself outside of it. Silence. And this time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt like a choice waiting to be made, not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably, because now both of them knew something clearly. This relationship wasn't going to stay in the safe space of almost. It was moving toward something deeper, something more demanding, something more real. And real connection doesn't survive on intention alone. It requires presence, honesty, and the willingness to be seen, even when you're not ready. And whether Adrian could meet her there was no longer a question she was asking out loud. It was one she was quietly waiting to see answered. Awareness doesn't rush you. It stays. It lingers in the background of your thoughts, quietly asking you to pay attention, until ignoring it becomes harder than facing it. That's where Evelyn was now. Nothing had broken. Nothing had ended. But something inside her had shifted from feeling to knowing, and knowing changes how you move. A few nights later, she sat alone in her apartment, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm light across the room. A book rested open in her lap, but her eyes hadn't moved across the page in a while. Her mind kept circling the same thought. What exactly am I holding on to here? Not Adrian, not the relationship, but the idea of what it could become. That distinction mattered, because there's a quiet danger in loving someone's potential. It makes you patient in ways that feel like strength. But sometimes, it's just hesitation disguised as hope. Evelyn closed the book slowly and set it aside. She wasn't confused. She was clarifying. There's a point in every meaningful connection where you have to ask yourself something uncomfortable. Am I experiencing this relationship as it is, or as I want it to be? And the answer, she realized, wasn't as simple as she hoped. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. Adrian. She looked at it for a moment, before answering. Hey, she said. Hey. His voice came, steady as always. Are you home? Yes. Can I come by? A pause, not hesitation, just awareness. Okay, she said. I'll be there in 20. The call ended. Evelyn stood, moving slowly through her apartment. Not preparing, not adjusting anything, just grounding herself, because she knew this wasn't just another evening. Something needed to be understood, not forced, not confronted, just brought into the open. When Adrian arrived, he looked the same as always. Composed, put together, controlled. But Evelyn noticed something now she hadn't fully named before. That control wasn't just a personality trait. It was a boundary, and she wasn't sure how far inside it she had been allowed. Hey, he said as he stepped in. Hey. He leaned in slightly, brushing a light kiss against her cheek. Familiar, warm, but measured. Everything about him was measured. And tonight, she saw it clearly. They moved to the living room. No rush, no tension, just quiet awareness sitting between them. You okay? He asked. Evelyn nodded. Yes. But her tone carried something different. Not distant, just thoughtful. Adrian noticed. You've been thinking, he said. I have. About us? She met his gaze. Yes. A small pause. Not uncomfortable, but intentional. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. Evelyn took a breath, not to prepare for conflict, but to stay grounded in honesty. I want to understand something, she said. What? She leaned slightly forward, her tone calm but clear. What does it mean to you to let someone fully into your life? Adrian didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't have one, but because he wasn't used to defining it. I think it means being present, he said. Evelyn nodded slightly. You already said that before, she replied, but I'm asking something more specific. He frowned slightly. Like what? Like this, she said gently. Do you believe that the difficult parts of your life, the unresolved parts, should be shared with someone you're building something real with? The room went quiet, because now, the question wasn't abstract anymore. It was direct. Adrian leaned back slightly, exhaling. I think it depends, he said. On what? On whether sharing them actually helps anything. Evelyn held his gaze. And if not sharing them creates distance? Another pause. This one, heavier. I don't want to create distance, he said. I know, she replied softly. But that's not the same as not doing it. That landed, because it was true. Not harsh, not accusatory, just accurate. Adrian looked at her more carefully now. You feel that? He asked. Yes. How long? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Since the moment I realized there was something you weren't letting me see. He nodded slowly. Baltimore, he said. Yes. Silence. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just real. I told you I wasn't ready to go into it, he said. You did, she replied. And you said that was okay. It was, she said. Another pause. Then, but okay doesn't mean it didn't change something. That was the truth. And it settled between them without resistance. Adrian ran his hand across his jaw, thinking, I don't want to lose what we have over something I'm still trying to figure out, he said. Evelyn's voice softened. And I don't want to build something with someone who only lets me in halfway. Neither of them spoke for a moment, because both statements were true, and sometimes, truth doesn't resolve tension. It reveals it. What are you asking me to do? Adrian asked. Evelyn shook her head slightly. I'm not asking you to explain everything tonight, she said. Then what? She met his eyes, fully, honestly. I'm asking you to decide whether you're willing to let me be part of your reality. Not just the parts that are easy to share. Adrian exhaled slowly. That's not a simple decision. I know, she said, but it's an important one. Another silence. But this one felt different. Not uncertain, not fragile, just defining. Because this wasn't about right or wrong. It was about alignment. What they each needed. What they were each willing to give. I don't know how to do that yet, Adrian said quietly. Evelyn nodded. I'm not asking you to know how, she replied. I'm asking if you're willing to try. That was the difference. And it mattered. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, there was no control in his expression, no careful framing, no measured response. Just honesty. I'm afraid of what happens if I do, he admitted. Evelyn's eyes softened. Of what? She asked gently. Of being seen differently, he said. Of changing how you see me. She held his gaze. That's already happening, she said quietly. That truth landed deeper than anything else, because it wasn't a threat. It was reality. Silence followed, longer this time, but necessary, because this was the moment where things became clear, not resolved, but clear. You're not asking for perfection, Adrian said. No, you're asking for honesty. Yes, and if I can't give that fully right now. Evelyn took a slow breath. Not to soften her answer, but to keep it steady. Then eventually she said, This will start to feel like something I have to adjust myself around. He frowned slightly. And you won't do that. It wasn't a question. Evelyn shook her head. No, and that was it. No argument, no emotion overflowing. Just clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because now, the situation wasn't undefined anymore. It wasn't something feels off. It was, this is what's missing. And once something is named, it can't be ignored. Adrian leaned back, staring down at his hands for a moment, thinking, processing, not reacting. And Evelyn didn't interrupt, because she understood something. This wasn't something she could solve. It was something he had to choose. I need time, he said finally. Evelyn nodded. Okay, no resistance, no pressure, just acceptance. But not passive acceptance. Conscious, aware. I'm not going anywhere right now, she added. And then, after a small pause, but I'm also not going to ignore what I'm feeling. Adrian looked up at her, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. This wasn't about conflict. It wasn't about disagreement. It was about truth, and whether he was ready to meet it, fully or not. And deep down, he knew something had changed, not in her, but in what she was willing to accept. And that meant something else too. Whatever came next would matter more than anything that had come before. Because now, this relationship wasn't running on connection alone. It was standing on a decision, one he couldn't avoid anymore. And neither could she. Truth doesn't arrive all at once. It builds pressure, quietly, slowly, beneath the surface, until holding it back takes more effort than releasing it. That's where Adrian was now. Not in crisis, not in collapse, but in that fragile space where avoidance stops feeling like control and starts feeling like weight. Days passed after that conversation. No dramatic distance, no sudden silence. Adrian still showed up. Evelyn still met him with the same calm presence. On the outside, nothing had broken, but internally, something had shifted into decision. Not immediate, not forced, but inevitable. Because once truth is acknowledged, it doesn't go back to being hidden. It waits for courage or for consequence. It was late when Adrian finally called her. Can you come over? He asked. There was something in his voice. Not urgency, not panic, just clarity. I can, Evelyn said. I'll send you the address, he added. You always do. A small pause. Tonight? Just come, he said quietly. That was new, and she felt it. I will, she replied. When Evelyn arrived, the apartment felt different. Not physically, but emotionally. There was no background music, no quiet sense of ease, just stillness. The kind that exists when something important is about to be said. Adrian stood near the window, his back partially turned, his posture not tense, but not relaxed either. He turned when he heard her step in. Hey, she said softly. Hey. No immediate movement toward her, no casual greeting, just presence, and that told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a normal night. She walked further into the room, placing her bag down slowly. I'm here, she said. Adrian nodded once. I know. A pause. Then, I think I'm ready to talk about Baltimore. There it was. Not dramatic, not heavy in tone, but final in intention. Evelyn didn't rush toward him, didn't react emotionally. She simply sat down, grounded, present. Okay, she said. Adrian remained standing for a moment longer, then slowly walked over, sitting across from her. For the first time since she had known him, he didn't look composed, not broken, not unstable, just unguarded, and that was different. I've spent years making sure this never became part of my life in a way I couldn't control, he began. Evelyn listened, not interrupting, not reacting, just receiving. It happened early, he continued, before things stabilized, before the company became what it is now. He paused briefly, choosing not how to say it, but how to stop avoiding it. There was a subsidiary operation in Baltimore, he said. Waste management. Industrial disposal. Evelyn stayed still, present, focused. There were violations, he continued. Serious ones. Another pause. But this one felt heavier, because now they were getting closer to the truth. What kind of violations? She asked quietly. Adrian looked at her, and for once, he didn't soften it. Illegal dumping, he said. The words sat in the room, clear, undeniable. Evelyn's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in her eyes did. Awareness deepening into understanding. Who was affected? She asked. Adrian exhaled slowly. A working-class neighborhood, long-term exposure, health consequences. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. Not visibly, but enough for her to feel it. And you knew? She asked. Another pause. This one longer. Yes, he said. The honesty was immediate and heavy. Evelyn held his gaze. When? After it had already been happening, he said. But before it became public. And what did you do? There it was. The question that mattered most. Adrian looked away briefly, then back at her. And this time, there was no distance left in his voice. I made sure it stayed contained. Silence. Complete. Unavoidable. Because now, the truth wasn't partial anymore. It was whole. Evelyn didn't speak immediately. Not because she didn't have a response, but because she understood something important. Some truths need space before they can be answered. And what does contained mean? She asked finally. Adrian didn't hesitate. Legal settlements, non-disclosure agreements, internal restructuring, pressure where it was needed. Evelyn absorbed that, not reacting outwardly, but feeling it fully. You protected the company, she said. Yes. At the expense of. He didn't answer, because he didn't need to. They both knew. The silence answered it. And somehow, that silence felt louder than anything he had said. Evelyn looked down for a moment, then back at him. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Adrian's voice lowered slightly. Because you were right. She didn't respond, because she needed him to say it fully. I wasn't just keeping something from you, he continued. I was keeping you outside of a part of my life that defines more than I wanted to admit. That mattered, not because it fixed anything, but because it was honest. And what changed? She asked. Adrian held her gaze. I realized that not saying it wasn't protecting anything. He said, it was just delaying the cost. That truth landed deeply, because it wasn't about guilt. It was about awareness. Evelyn nodded slowly. And what do you feel about it now? She asked. Adrian leaned back slightly, thinking, not avoiding, just searching for the most honest answer. I used to think carrying it was enough, he said. That feeling responsible meant I was still decent. And now? He looked at her. And now I think I just found a way to live with it, without actually facing it. That was the shift. Not in the past, but in how he saw it. And that mattered more than anything else. Evelyn took a slow breath. Not overwhelmed. Not reactive. Just processing. Do you regret it? She asked. Yes, he said immediately. And what does that mean to you? He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, she said, her voice steady, is regret something you feel, or something that changes what you do? That question settled deeply, because it forced something beyond emotion. It asked for responsibility. Adrian didn't answer right away, because this wasn't a question he had fully faced before. I don't know yet, he admitted. Evelyn nodded, and that was honest. More honest than a rehearsed answer would have been. The room fell quiet again, but this silence was different. Not tense, not uncertain, just real, because now everything was on the table, not just the situation, but the truth behind it, and the person behind that truth. Evelyn looked at him carefully, not judging, not excusing, just seeing fully, and that was something Adrian had avoided for a long time. Not being judged, but being seen without control. You didn't trust me with this, she said softly. Adrian shook his head. It wasn't about trust, he said. It was about control. That was the most honest thing he had said all night. Evelyn nodded slowly. I know. And in that moment, the conversation shifted again, not toward resolution, but toward something deeper, understanding, not agreement, not forgiveness, just clarity. And clarity, even when it hurts, is where real decisions begin. Clarity doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like standing in front of something you can't unsee. That's where Evelyn was now. Not shocked, not confused, just fully aware. The kind of awareness that doesn't rush you into reaction, but doesn't let you hide from what something means either. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after Adrian spoke, not because there was nothing left to say, but because what had already been said needed space. Evelyn sat still, her hands resting lightly together, her breathing steady, but deeper now, not overwhelmed, just processing truth in its full weight. Adrian didn't interrupt. For once, he didn't try to guide the moment, didn't try to soften it, didn't try to control how it unfolded. He just waited, and that alone said something. Finally, Evelyn spoke. You knew people were being affected, she said quietly. Yes. And you chose to protect the company instead of exposing it. Yes. No hesitation, no defense, just honesty. Evelyn nodded once, not approving, not condemning, just acknowledging reality. Why? She asked. Adrian exhaled slowly, not to buy time, but because the answer mattered. Because everything was unstable at that point, he said. The company was already at risk. My father was dying. If that situation had gone public the way it should have, everything would have collapsed. Evelyn held his gaze. And that justified it? Another pause. This one heavier. No, he said. That mattered. Not because it erased what happened, but because he wasn't hiding behind reasoning. He was facing it. I told myself it did, he continued. At the time, I convinced myself that stabilizing everything first would give me the chance to fix it later. And did you? She asked. He didn't answer, because he didn't need to. The silence carried the truth. Evelyn looked away for a moment, not to avoid him, but to absorb that. Because this wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what he had chosen not to do after. You built your life on top of something you never corrected, she said. Adrian nodded slowly. Yes. That was the part that settled deepest. Not the mistake, not even the decision, but the continuation, the way it became part of his foundation. Evelyn looked back at him, her voice softer now, but heavier. And you let me stand inside that life, without knowing. Adrian didn't try to respond immediately, because there was no way to soften that truth. I didn't know how to bring you into it, he said finally. Evelyn's expression didn't change much, but you knew you were keeping me out. Another pause. Yes, that was it. No defense, no justification, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, that hurts more than anything else, because there's nothing to argue with, nothing to correct, just something to accept. Evelyn took a slow breath, her voice steady, but quieter now. You didn't just hide what happened, she said. You decided what I was allowed to know about you. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, not to escape it, but because he felt it. Fully. I didn't trust what would happen if I didn't control it, he said. Evelyn nodded. I know. Another silence. But this one wasn't empty. It was filled with meaning, with consequence, with the quiet understanding that something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. I need to ask you something, Evelyn said. Adrian looked at her. Okay. She held his gaze. Who are you without all of this? He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean the version of you that exists without the control, she said. Without managing what people see, without protecting the image you've built. Adrian didn't answer right away, because he didn't have one. And that realization hit harder than anything else. I don't know, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded slowly. And that's the problem. Not harsh, not critical, just clear. Because it wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about identity, about who he had become around it, and who he was without it. I thought carrying the weight of it meant I was doing something right, Adrian said. Evelyn looked at him. That's not accountability, she said softly. That's survival. The distinction landed deeply, because it was true. He hadn't been confronting it. He had been living around it. And I brought you into that, he said. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, because she was still understanding what that meant for her. I let myself be there, she said finally. That surprised him. You didn't know, he said. I didn't know the details, she replied, but I felt the distance. She paused. I just didn't fully understand it. Another silence. But this one felt different, less heavy, more reflective, because now they weren't just talking about him. They were talking about what had been happening between them. I kept thinking if I gave it time you'd let me in, she continued. Adrian's voice dropped. I wanted to, but wanting to isn't the same as doing it, she said. He nodded slowly. I know. And he did, now more than ever. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her posture still calm, but more grounded than before. There's something else, she said. What? She looked at him carefully. Do you understand what this change is? Adrian didn't answer immediately, because he knew. This wasn't just about the truth. It was about what came after. I think so, he said. Say it, she replied gently. Another pause. Then, it changes how you see me, he said. Yes. And how you trust me. Yes. And whether this still works. The words sat there, clear, unavoidable. Evelyn nodded once. Yes. Silence followed. But this time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt like something coming to its natural point. Not forced, not rushed, just real. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, there was no expectation in his expression, no attempt to hold on to anything. Just acceptance. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. Evelyn's eyes softened. I know, and she meant it. But knowing something doesn't change what it means. I just don't know if what we had was built on something complete, she said. That was the truth. And it settled deeply. Because it couldn't be undone. It could only be faced. Another long pause. And then, Evelyn stood, not abruptly, not emotionally, just intentionally. Adrian didn't stop her. Because he understood something now. This moment wasn't about convincing, it was about consequence. I need space, she said, her voice calm, clear, final, but not harsh. He nodded slowly. I understand. She picked up her bag, paused for a brief second, then looked at him one last time. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with something more complex, something quieter. I'm not leaving because of what you did, she said softly. Adrian looked at her. Then why? Because of what you chose not to do with it, she replied. That was the difference. And it mattered. More than anything else. Another silence. Then she turned, walked to the door, and left. No dramatic exit. No raised voices. No final speech. Just distance. And sometimes, that's what real endings look like. Not explosive. Not loud. Just clear. Adrian stood there long after the door closed. Not moving. Not thinking. Just feeling the weight of something he could no longer control. Not the situation. Not the outcome. Not even how she saw him now. And for the first time, he understood something he hadn't before. Truth doesn't just reveal who you are. It reveals what your choices have already built. And now, he had to face all of it. Without control, without distance, without anything left to manage, just himself. And what came next? There's a kind of quiet that only comes after something ends. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that feels like rest, but the kind that sits in a room and reminds you, something used to be here. That's the quiet Evelyn walked into when she returned home that night. She didn't cry. Not immediately. She didn't collapse into emotion or replay every word that had just been said. She simply moved, set her bag down, took off her shoes, walked to the window, and stood there, still. Because sometimes the first response to something heavy isn't emotion. It's recognition. The kind that says, this mattered, and now. It's different. The city moved, like it always did. Unaware, uninterrupted. People walked. Cars passed. Lights flickered on and off, like nothing had changed. But inside Evelyn, something had, not broken, not shattered, but clarified. And clarity doesn't rush you into reaction. It asks you to sit with it, to understand what something meant. Before deciding what to do with it, she thought about him. Not the version of Adrian she had just left behind, but the one she had come to know over time. The man who listened, who showed up, who tried, in ways that were real even if incomplete. And that was the part that made this harder, because this wasn't a situation where she could say, he didn't care. He did. That was never the question. The question was he willing to meet her in the same truth she was standing in? And now, she had her answer. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Evelyn walked away from the window and sat on the couch, pulling her legs in slightly. Her mind wasn't racing. It was organizing, separating what she felt from what she knew. Because those two things don't always align. She felt connected to him. She knew something was missing. And choosing between those two is where most people lose themselves. But she had been there before, years ago, in a different relationship, different person, same pattern, staying because it felt meaningful, even when it wasn't fully right. And she had promised herself something back then, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. Never again will I stay somewhere that asks me to ignore what I feel. And tonight, that promise mattered, more than comfort, more than attachment, more than the hope that things might change. Because hope, she had learned, is powerful, but it can also be misleading. It makes you believe in potential, even when reality is asking you to pay attention. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it immediately. She didn't need to. She knew. Adrian. She let it sit there for a moment longer, not to punish him, not to create distance, just to choose her response intentionally. Then she picked it up. A message. I understand why you left. I just wish I had said it sooner. Evelyn read it once, then again, and something about it felt honest. But honesty after the fact doesn't always repair what was missing before it. She typed a response, paused, deleted it, then typed again. It's not about when you said it. It's about when you were ready to. She stared at the message for a moment, then sent it. Not harsh, not emotional, just clear. And clarity, even in small moments, is a form of self-respect. Across the city, Adrian read her message in silence. No immediate reply, no attempt to fix it. Because he understood something now. This wasn't a situation that could be corrected with the right words. It required something deeper, something he hadn't fully given yet. And maybe something he still didn't fully understand. Back in her apartment, Evelyn set her phone aside. She leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. Not to escape, just to breathe. Because choosing yourself, even when it's the right decision, still carries weight, still leaves space, still asks you to sit with the absence of something that once felt real. And that absence doesn't always hurt loudly. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, like reaching for something that isn't there anymore. The next morning felt different, not heavy, not painful, just unfamiliar. There was no message waiting for her, no good morning from Adrian, no quiet continuation of something that had become part of her routine. And that absence spoke clearly, but instead of filling it, she let it exist. Because she understood something now. Not every space needs to be replaced. Some spaces need to be felt, to be understood, to be respected for what they represent. Days passed. Then a week, no contact. Not because they were avoiding each other, but because both of them knew. This wasn't something that could be rushed back into normal. It required distance, not to disconnect, but to reflect, to understand, to decide, Evelyn returned to her routines. Work, reading, long walks, but everything felt sharper, not painful, just more present. Because without distraction, you feel things more clearly. And what she felt wasn't regret. It wasn't even sadness. It was something quieter, something stronger, clarity. She missed him, yes, but she didn't miss confusion. She didn't miss the subtle distance. She didn't miss the feeling of being close, but not fully included. And that difference made all the difference. One afternoon, she sat in the same cafe where they had first seen each other again. Same seat, same quiet atmosphere, different version of herself. She opened a book, then paused, smiled slightly, and turned to the last page first. Not because she didn't trust the story, but because she finally understood something differently. It's not about knowing how something ends. It's about knowing what you're willing to accept along the way. And that lesson had cost her something, but it had also given her something more valuable, herself. Across the city, Adrian stood in his office, looking out at a skyline that had always made him feel in control. Today, it didn't, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about outcomes. He wasn't thinking about strategy. He wasn't thinking about how to manage what came next. He was thinking about something simpler, harder, more honest. What did I actually choose? And more importantly, what am I willing to change now that I see it clearly? Because losing Evelyn hadn't felt like punishment. It felt like consequence. And consequence doesn't ask for reaction. It asks for reflection. And that reflection was just beginning. Time didn't rush either of them. It didn't soften things quickly. It didn't offer easy clarity overnight. It just moved. And in that movement, something important began to take shape. Not between them, but within them. Adrian had spent most of his life believing that action solved everything. Fix the problem, stabilize the situation, control the outcome. That was how he had survived pressure, built success, maintained order. But this wasn't something he could fix, because it wasn't just about what he had done. It was about who he had become around it. And that required something different, not control, not strategy, but confrontation. The first step didn't look dramatic. There was no announcement, no declaration of change, just a quiet decision one morning. He reopened files he hadn't looked at in years. Baltimore, every document, every report, every internal note that had once been carefully managed and buried beneath layers of legal structure. He didn't skim, he read, fully, and for the first time. He didn't read it as a problem to manage. He read it as reality. What had happened, who had been affected, what had been minimized, what had been avoided, and more importantly, what he had chosen not to face. There's a difference between knowing something happened and allowing yourself to feel what it means. That difference changed everything. Later that week, he sat in a meeting with legal advisors, not as the man who needed protection, but as someone asking different questions. What would it take to reopen the case properly? He asked. The room went still. One of the advisors leaned forward slightly. Reopen? In what sense? In the sense that it wasn't handled the way it should have been. Adrian said. Another pause. You're exposing yourself to significant consequences, someone added. I already am, he replied calmly. But this would make it public. Adrian nodded. Yes. And the company. I'm not asking about the company, he said, cutting in. Not sharply, but clearly. I'm asking what it would take to make it right. That changed the room, because they were used to conversations about protection, not accountability. The distinction was subtle, but everything. Meanwhile, Evelyn's growth didn't look like action. It looked like stillness, like choosing not to reach for what felt familiar, like allowing herself to exist without trying to resolve what had already been made clear. She didn't check her phone expecting a message, didn't replay conversations in search of different meanings, didn't question whether she had done the right thing. Because she knew something now she hadn't fully trusted before. Peace doesn't come from holding on to something that feels incomplete. It comes from choosing what aligns, even when it costs you something. One evening, she met a friend for dinner. The conversation drifted naturally. Until eventually, do you miss him? Her friend asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. Yes, she said. And I don't want to go back to something that felt like I had to wait to be fully included. Her friend studied her. That sounds like growth. Evelyn shrugged lightly. It feels like clarity. There was no bitterness in her tone, no resentment, just understanding. And that's how you know something has shifted internally. When you can speak about it without needing to defend your choice. Back in his world, Adrian's decisions began to take form, not performative, not strategic, but real, independent investigations, direct outreach to affected families, without lawyers speaking for him, financial restitution, not framed as charity, but responsibility, and most importantly, transparency, not partial, not controlled. Each step cost him something: reputation, stability, control. But for the first time, he wasn't measuring loss the way he used to, because something had changed in how he saw value. Before, value meant maintaining what he had built. Now, it meant becoming someone who could stand behind it. And that difference was everything. Weeks turned into months. No contact between them. Not because they were avoiding each other, but because they understood something important. Growth isn't proven through words. It's proven through time, through consistency, through who you become when no one is watching. One afternoon, Evelyn found herself walking through a community event in Brooklyn. Something small, local, grounded. Books, volunteers, conversations that weren't trying to impress anyone. And that's when she saw him, Adrian, not in a suit, not surrounded by structure, just there, talking to someone, listening, fully present. She didn't approach immediately. She observed, because she wasn't looking for who he used to be. She was seeing who he was becoming. There's a difference, and it matters. When he finally turned and saw her, he didn't smile right away, not out of hesitation, but recognition, because this wasn't just seeing her again. This was facing everything that had happened. Without distance, they walked toward each other slowly. No performance, just presence. "Hi," he said. "Hi." A pause, but not uncomfortable, just aware. "You look different," she said. "So do you." She smiled slightly. "In a good way?" "Yes." Another small pause. Then, "I've been following some of what you've been doing," she said. Adrian nodded. "I figured, why didn't you reach out?" He met her gaze. "Because I didn't want to explain change while I was still figuring out if it was real." That mattered, more than anything else he could have said. Evelyn studied him for a moment. "You're not trying to convince me of anything," she said. "No." "Why?" "Because I don't think that's something I get to do anymore." That was the difference, not just in his words, but in his understanding. Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's fair." They stood there for a moment, not rushing to define what this was, because it didn't need to be defined immediately. "What have you learned?" she asked. Adrian exhaled lightly. "That regret isn't the same as responsibility," he said, "and that carrying something doesn't mean you've faced it." Evelyn's eyes softened slightly. "That's true. And you?" he asked. "What have you learned?" She smiled faintly. "That love isn't about how much you can understand someone. It's about whether you can exist fully as yourself while loving them." That landed deeply, because it named exactly what had been missing. They stood in that understanding for a moment longer, not as two people trying to fix the past, but as two people who had allowed it to change them. And that was different, real, uncontrolled, honest, and maybe that's where something new begins. Not in the absence of what happened, but in the presence of who you've become after it. Reconnection doesn't feel like the beginning. It feels like standing in a place you once knew, seeing it differently. That's what it was for Evelyn and Adrian. Not a restart, not a continuation. Something in between, something quieter, more honest. They didn't leave the event together. That would have been too easy, too familiar. Instead, they stayed, separately, but aware of each other. Evelyn moved through the space, speaking with volunteers, flipping through books, allowing herself to stay grounded in the moment instead of being pulled into what his presence meant. Adrian did the same, not avoiding her, not watching her constantly, just existing. And that mattered, because this wasn't about returning to what they had. It was about understanding what was possible now, and possibility requires patience. When the event began to wind down, chairs being folded, conversations softening into goodbyes, they found themselves near the exit at the same time. No coordination, just timing. "Are you heading out?" he asked. "Yes." "Can I walk with you?" Evelyn looked at him. Not cautiously, not guardedly, but intentionally. "You can," she said. Not yes, not no. Just aloud. And that difference mattered. The air outside was cool, not cold, just enough to make the city feel quieter than usual. They walked side by side, not touching, not distant, just present. For a while, neither of them spoke, and that silence didn't need to be filled, because it wasn't empty. It was processing, feeling, understanding. Finally, Adrian broke it. "I used to think silence meant something was wrong," he said. Evelyn glanced at him. "And now? I think it depends on what's sitting inside it." She nodded slightly. "That's true." Another pause. Then, "What's sitting in this one?" he asked. Evelyn thought about it. Not quickly, not defensively. "Honesty," she said. He looked at her. "That's a good sign." "It is," she replied. "But it doesn't mean it's easy." Adrian nodded. "I don't expect it to be." That was new, and she noticed. "You don't expect anything from me right now," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. "No," he said. "Why?" "Because I understand that what we had changed," he replied. Evelyn looked ahead, her expression thoughtful. "It did. And I don't think I get to decide what it becomes next," he added. That mattered, more than anything else he could have said, because it showed something different. Not control, not direction, just respect for the process. "You're not trying to move this forward," she said. "No." "Why?" "Because I don't think progress is something you push," he said. "I think it's something you earn." Evelyn's lips curved slightly, not into a full smile, but enough to show she understood. "That's different from how you used to think." "I know." They walked a little further, the city around them moving quietly, almost unnoticed. Then Evelyn spoke again. "Do you miss what we had?" she asked. Adrian didn't hesitate. "Yes," she nodded. "But I don't miss how incomplete it felt," he added. That stopped her slightly, not physically, but internally, because that answer wasn't about holding on. It was about understanding. "That's honest," she said. "It took time to get there," he replied. "And now? Now I don't want something that only works because parts of it aren't being seen," he said. That landed deeply, because it echoed something she had said before. But this time, it came from him, and that mattered. They reached the subway entrance, the same kind of place where things begin, or end, or sometimes pause. They stopped, facing each other now, not far, not close, just aware. "This is usually where people decide something," Adrian said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow slightly. "Like what? Whether they're trying again, or letting go." She smiled faintly. "And what do you think we're doing?" Adrian exhaled softly. "I think we're not forcing an answer yet." She nodded. "That sounds right." Another pause. But this one felt lighter, because it didn't carry pressure. It carried choice. "What would you want?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him carefully, not for the answer he hoped for, but for the truth. She felt, "I'd want something real," she said. "And before, it wasn't." "It was real," she replied, "but it wasn't complete." He nodded slowly. "I understand that now. And understanding it isn't the same as being able to change it," she added. "I know." Silence. Then, "But I am changing it," he said quietly. Not to convince her, not to prove anything, just stating truth. Evelyn held his gaze. "I can see that." And she meant it. But seeing something isn't the same as trusting it yet. And both of them knew that. "I don't know what this is going to be," she said. "Neither do I. And that's uncomfortable." "Yes." Another pause. Then Evelyn smiled. Soft, thoughtful. "But it's also honest." Adrian smiled back. "Yes, it is." He reached for her hand slowly, not assuming, not expecting, just offering. And this time, she didn't hesitate. She let him hold it. Not tightly, not possessively, just gently, like something being acknowledged, not claimed. And in that moment, there was no certainty, no guarantees, no promises of what this would become. But there was something else, something quieter, stronger, more real. Two people, not trying to return to who they were, but willing to meet each other as who they had become. And that was enough for now. Because sometimes, love doesn't come back the same way. Sometimes it grows into something different, something less certain, but more honest. And whether that becomes something lasting, or simply something meaningful, depends on what happens next. Not what they say, not what they hope, but what they choose, consistently, over time. And for the first time, they were both aware of that. Fully, they didn't define what they were, And that, surprisingly, made everything clearer. No labels, no rushed decisions, no need to recreate something that had already been broken and understood. Just time and choice. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn and Adrian saw each other again. Not constantly, not intensely, but intentionally. Coffee, sometimes. Walks through quiet streets. Conversations that didn't avoid difficult things, but didn't force them either. There was no pretending, no slipping back into old patterns unnoticed, because both of them were paying attention now. To themselves, to each other, to the space between what they felt and what they were ready to give, and that awareness changed everything. One evening, they sat on a park bench as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and grey. Evelyn pulled her jacket a little closer around her shoulders, glancing at him. "You're different in small ways," she said. Adrian looked at her. "Like what?" "You pause more," she said, "before you answer." "What?" He nodded slightly. "I'm trying to notice what I'm about to say, before I say it." "Why?" "Because before, I used words to manage how things felt," he admitted. "Now I'm trying to use them to reflect what's actually true." Evelyn studied him. "That's not easy." "No," he said, "but it's necessary." A small silence followed. Comfortable, real. Then, Evelyn spoke again. "I used to think love meant understanding someone deeply," she said. "And now? I think it also means being willing to be understood," she replied. Adrian nodded. "That's harder." "It is," she agreed, "because it requires letting go of control." He looked at her then. Really looked. "And you're doing that?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm trying." He let out a quiet breath. "So am I." They sat there for a while longer, not talking, not avoiding, just being, and that simple presence carried something new. No pressure to impress, no fear of saying the wrong thing, just a quiet willingness to exist honestly in the same space. Eventually, Adrian broke the silence. "Do you think people can actually change?" he asked. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She thought about it. Not lightly. "I think people can become more aware," she said. "And that leads to change?" "It can," she replied, "if they're willing to act on it." Adrian nodded slowly. "And if they're not?" "Then they repeat the same patterns," she said. Another pause. Then, "Do you think I've changed?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him carefully, not searching for flaws, not looking for proof, just observing. "I think you're in the process of changing," she said. "That's not the same." "No," she agreed. "But it's honest." He accepted that, because he understood something now. Change isn't something you claim. It's something you live long enough for others to recognize. They left the park as the evening settled in, walking side by side again. But this time, the space between them felt different. Not cautious, not distant, just aware. At the corner, they slowed, neither of them rushing to end the moment. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said. "You always do," Evelyn replied softly. He smiled slightly. "Are you still afraid this will feel incomplete again?" Evelyn paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she respected it enough to say it truthfully. "Yes," she said. Adrian nodded. "That's fair. And you?" she asked. "Are you afraid of anything?" He thought for a moment. Then, "I'm afraid of becoming someone who understands what's right, but still doesn't fully do it," he said. That landed, because it wasn't about her. It was about him, and that kind of honesty matters. Evelyn's expression softened. "That's a real fear." "It is. And what are you doing about it?" Adrian looked at her. "I'm paying attention to my choices now," he said. "Not just my intentions." She nodded slowly. "That's where it shows." Another quiet moment passed. Then Evelyn stepped slightly closer, not into certainty, but into presence. "I don't need this to be perfect," she said. "I know. I just need it to be real." "It is," he replied. She held his gaze. "Then let it stay that way." He nodded. "I will." He reached for her hand again, and this time, it felt different. Not tentative, not cautious, just natural. She held it, not because she was sure of everything, but because she was sure of something more important. She wasn't losing herself in this. She was bringing herself into it, fully, and that made all the difference. They didn't promise forever. They didn't define what came next. They didn't force clarity where time was still needed, but they walked forward, together, not as people who had everything figured out, not as people who had erased the past, but as people who had faced it, learned from it, and chosen to move differently because of it. Because in the end, love isn't proven by how perfectly it begins, or how easily it continues. It's revealed in the moments where truth becomes unavoidable, and both people decide whether they're willing to meet it, fully, honestly, without hiding behind who they wish they were. Evelyn had learned that love without self-respect becomes sacrifice. Adrian had learned that power without accountability becomes emptiness. And, together, they had learned that real connection doesn't come from avoiding difficult truths. It comes from choosing to face them, even when it costs you something, even when it changes everything. The future in front of them wasn't certain, but it was clear. And sometimes, that's more than enough, because clarity doesn't guarantee forever. But it gives something just as important, peace, and the freedom to love, without losing yourself inside it. If you made it to the end of this story, then this question is for you. What matters more in love, the connection you feel, or the truth you live with? Would you have walked away like Evelyn, or stayed and tried to rebuild like Adrian? I want you to be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story made you pause, reflect, or even see your own life differently, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, because the next story might not just entertain you, it might change how you see love completely.